A bank sent two men to take a 71-year-old farmer's land in Oxfordshire. 3 generations had worked that soil. Nobody local raised a hand to stop it. A stranger did. By 11 that morning, the farm still belonged to the family. I'll say this plainly before we go any further. The name in this story isn't pulled from a parish record. It's the name the village settled on, so the family wouldn't have to hear their real one repeated in every pub between here and Burford. We're dealing in legend, not a court transcript. Keep that in mind as we go. 68 acres of Cotswold brash, flinty, stubborn ground that farmers near Chipping Norton know too well. Barley mostly, and a handful of sheep kept more from habit than profit. Edmund Whitlock's father had farmed this land, his father before him. There's a photograph that still hangs above the range in the farmhouse kitchen. 3 generations of Whitlock men, squinting into the sun, standing at the same gate that's still there today. The paint peels in exactly the same place it always has. It was never a grand place. No lake, no folly, no gallery of ancestors in oil. Just a crooked chimney that had needed repointing since the 80s, a barn roof that had seen better decades, and land that had fed a family through 2 wars and at least one summer so wet the wheat simply lay down in the mud. But land like that doesn't run on sentiment. It runs on machinery that breaks at the worst possible moment. On fertilizer that costs more each spring than the last. On a bank manager in Oxford who has never stood in a field at 5 in the sleet, but holds the paperwork deciding whether you get to keep doing it. Edmund had borrowed against the farm in the 90s for a combine he genuinely needed. He'd been paying it down every harvest since, patient and dogged, the way his father taught him. Then the wheel stopped turning. 2 bad harvests back to back. A summer wet enough to rot half the barley before it could be cut. His wife's illness ate through what savings were left, quietly, completely, the way illness does. By spring, the letters had stopped using the word understand. They'd started using the word require. By September, a date was circled on a calendar in a solicitor's office in Oxford. By the first week of October, a notice was cable-tied to the same gate 3 generations of Whitlock men had leaned on. The village knew. Villages always know. Where everyone's grandfather farmed everyone else's grandfather's field, a farm going under the hammer isn't gossip. It's grief with a start time printed on a laminated sheet. If you've ever watched something that mattered hang in someone else's hands, you already know the feeling I'm describing. That particular kind of held breath. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from today. This story travels further than Oxfordshire ever expected. The lane up to the farm was never built for the traffic it got that morning. Land Rovers mostly, a few estate cars from villages 3 miles off, driven over by people who weren't bidding on anything. They just wanted to be present. The countryside still does that, even when there's nothing practical to be done. Someone had set up a coffee urn on a trestle table by the barn. Nobody had organized it. It simply appeared, the way these things do, along with a plate of shortbread nobody had the stomach to touch. Edmund stood by his own back door in a jacket that had clearly been ironed for the occasion. That detail was somehow the hardest one to watch. A man losing everything, still choosing to look his best for it, as if good manners were the last thing left that was entirely his to control. His daughter, Kate, stood beside him, not touching him. Some grief doesn't want to be touched. It only wants company, and she gave him exactly that. The auctioneer read the lot in the flat, practiced voice of a man who'd done this too many times already that year. 68 acres, farmhouse, outbuildings, machinery listed like a shopping order. You read something that way when feeling it each time would be unbearable. At the back of the yard, leaning against a gatepost, arms folded, stood a man in a weathered oilskin coat and flat cap, a battered pickup parked crooked behind him. He hadn't spoken to anyone. He'd simply arrived without ceremony and taken a position where he could see everything and be seen by no one in particular. Nobody recognized him yet. Give it 20 minutes. There's an unwritten rule at farm auctions like this one, older than anyone standing in that yard. You don't bid against a neighbor on his own front lawn while his family watches you do it. Nobody's ever needed to write it down. Breaking it means never being welcome in that pub again. So when the bidding opened, the yard did what English yards do. It studied its boots. Nobody local raised a hand. Then a voice came from a man in a sharp overcoat near the front. Nobody's neighbor. Nobody's anything. driven up from London that morning, representing a firm that had, according to the muttering going round the yard, been quietly buying up small Cotswold farms all year. Cheap, one at a time, betting that planning permission 20 years out would be worth more than the barley currently in the ground. He named a figure. Low. Insultingly low. The kind that clears the bank's debt and leaves a family with nothing to show for 41 years of 5 a.m. starts. The auctioneer hesitated before repeating it. A decent man hesitates before saying something he knows will land badly. Kate's hand found her father's arm and stayed there. And that was the moment the man at the gatepost pushed his cap back and said, in a voice half the yard suddenly recognized, "That seems a touch mean, if I'm honest." The coffee urn, by every account, briefly stopped pouring. "Sorry, who are you?" the auctioneer asked, not unreasonably. "Just a man who likes this bit of countryside," came the reply. "Carry on. I'll bid when it's worth bidding." The council spent ratepayer money years earlier fighting Callum Fairweather over a planning dispute on his own land, trying to keep him small and quiet. That morning, standing at a gatepost in someone else's yard, he did more for his own reputation in 10 minutes than any of it ever managed to undo. He didn't bid low, and he didn't bid politely. He bid the way people said he did most things, with a quiet enjoyment of watching the other man's face change with every raise of his hand. 10,000 became 15. 15 became 22. Somewhere in the mid-20s, the London man's phone rang. A short, tense conversation followed, his voice dropping to the particular urgent whisper men in overcoats reserve for calls they'd rather the crowd not overhear. He folded the way men like that fold, when the number stops making commercial sense and starts making a point instead. The firm that sent him to buy land cheaply had, in the space of one October morning, become the free advertising for exactly the kind of local resistance it was trying to price out of existence. The yard had gone almost silent by then. Even the vicar's wife had stopped pouring. A dog that had been barking at nothing all morning seemed to sense the shift in the air and stop too. If this is the sort of story that keeps bringing you back here, hit subscribe and tap the bell. There's a great deal more of Britain's old stories left to tell, and I promise this one isn't finished yet. Here the story splits, depending on who in the village you ask. This is where legend always gets untidy, and honestly, I rather like that it does. Some say he paid the full amount there on the tailgate, writing the check against his own knee while the wind tried to take it out of his hands. Some say he insisted the deed go straight back into Edmund's name, no strings, no mortgage, handed the farm back and told the solicitor to sort the paperwork however was legally tidiest, as though the details were beneath his notice next to the principle of the thing. Some say, and this is the detail that always gets a laugh in the retelling, he then spent 20 minutes inspecting Edmund's rust-spotted combine with what witnesses called genuine worrying enthusiasm, poking at the header and asking whether Edmund might ever consider growing malting barley. That detail fits a man whose own farm, 40 miles down the road, has spent years buying grain from smallholders at a fair price instead of whatever the wholesalers felt like offering that season, because paying growers properly was never, for him, the more difficult decision it apparently is for everyone else. Whether or not Fairweather really stood in that yard on that particular October morning, the sentiment isn't invented from nothing. If anything, it undersells what the man has actually done, on record, for years. Buying land nobody else wanted, employing people the cities had stopped noticing, insisting, loudly and often, that the countryside is worth more than the spreadsheets say. Villages don't usually invent legends about strangers. They invent them about people whose character already fits the shape of the story being told about them. So did it happen exactly the way it's told? Nobody in Chipping Norton will show you a receipt, no framed deed on a farmhouse wall, just a pub, a handful of witnesses who tell it differently depending how many pints in they are, and a farm that's still, as far as anyone can establish, in the Whitlock family's hands. What isn't folklore, what's simply on the record, is that the man this story attaches itself to has spent years doing quietly, and at real financial risk to himself, precisely the sort of thing this story imagines him doing in one dramatic morning. Maybe that yard never happened exactly this way. Maybe there was no Edmund, no check written on a knee in the October wind. But somewhere in Oxfordshire, in 100 smaller, less cinematic ways, that morning has been happening for years. One fair price and one honored contract at a time. That, more than anything, is probably why the story survives at all. If a tale like that is the reason you keep coming back to this corner of the internet, you're exactly who we make these for. Subscribe if you haven't, tap the bell so you don't miss where we go next, and drop a comment. Do you think a story like this needs to be entirely true to be entirely worth telling? I'd genuinely love to know. Thank you for spending this time with us. See you in the next one.